Hello everyone! This week we're going to talk about memory. So, not only are we going to cover different types of memory, but also how this process works in our brain. So last week we talked a lot about learning, and we're trying to expand upon that. So how do we take in all this information that we're learning? How does it stay in our brain? How can we pull it out for retrieval later? That's what we're going to look at. This is a two-part series. The first part is going to talk about the process and the types of memories, and the second part is going to talk about eyewitness testimony. So both of these content sections are in your notebook text under memory. Make sure you read them both for this week. They're pretty short. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me. And also note that I will not have a reading quiz as I initially planned, but I do want to do a reflection. So I have a TED Talk video by the Elizabeth Loftus, a very prominent memory psychologist, and I want you to watch the video and gather your reflections on the different topics she addresses. But that information will be posted in your unit folder, so we'll talk about that later. Because now we're going to talk about our learning objectives. So for this section, I want you to define and note the differences between the following types of memory: working memory, episodic memory, semantic memory, and collective memory. So these are different types of memories, and they're going to represent different things. And we're going to go through these with prominent examples to help illuminate them. Describe the 3 stages in the process of learning and remembering. We will do that: encoding, storage, retrieval. Seems simple enough, but we're going to go into each of those components and work them out. Describe strategies that can use the... I'm tired. Describe strategies that can be used to enhance the original learning or encoding of information. So how can we remember information better? We're going to talk about that. This will be great for any of your classes you have to study for. Describe strategies that can improve the process of retrieval. How do we take that information back out after we've already learned it? And describe why mnemonic devices, acrostics, acronyms, all those things work so well. We're going to get into all of that today. Now this video is of a memory athlete. He is a Swedish man, I think. I forget his name, sorry. But he is a world champion in memory tasks. So every year, I guess, they hold a memory tournament to test people's different memories, and these people who attend these tournaments are able to do something wild, like remember 26 decks of cards in a certain order in an hour. Some of this stuff is stuff we couldn't imagine. Reciting pi to the 50,000th integer, right? So that's what this man does. And you may be thinking, well, he may be just smarter than us. He's more intelligent. That's why he can do it. Not particularly so. We could have the potential to do these kinds of things if we committed to refining our memory the way he has. Now, this is an extreme example, but this man uses a lot of imagery and a lot of different distinguishing, elaborate symbols to represent memory. He gives everything distinctness and imagery, and this is a significant detail when we talk about memory. How we choose to remember things is what significance do we give it? How distinguishable is the information? And so while we may not be trying to recite pi to the 100,000th integer, we can use some of these methods that he talked about in our everyday lives, or maybe learning to study more efficiently. But I will let you watch that on your own time, because I don't want to waste our recording time having a video inside of the video. Now, for the information processing model, this looks like a lot, but after I explain it, hopefully it'll be illuminated for you. This is the idea that our information is processed by our brain according to this map. Now, encoding. If I'm going to break it down to the basics, we encode information. This could be you typing up your little information into your computer, right? Because our brains are often compared to computers in cognitive psychology, which analyzes how we make sense of the information, how we process information, language, stuff like that. Think of a computer. So encoding is we type in, maybe we're writing a paper. That's our analogy for the information. So the initial learning of information we're typing in. Storage is simply saving the file so we can have it for later. We're saving it out in our computer or somewhere. We'll be able to find it. Whether we classified it or categorized it a certain way, that might help. And retrieval is just accessing the information later when you need it. So when you finish the file, do you know where to find it so you can use it again? That's the information processing model in a nutshell. But how this works with our different types of memories is that we are constantly bombarded with stimuli. So we're going to start on the left-hand side of the screen. We're constantly bombarded with stimuli. So this could be certain smells, certain noises, things we see all around us. This is going to be sensory information that's going to go to our sensory memory. Our sensory memory is kind of like a filter for the rest of the information coming in. Its capacity is generally 3 to 7 units, so this capacity that's listed on here is just how much information can we hold in that stage of memory. Sensory memory is very limited. As you see, the time frame is a half a second to 3 seconds. That is all the time our brain will spend processing that information. If we don't draw our attention to it, see here where it says attention? Well, if it grabs our attention, if that sensory memory grabs our attention, it will go into our working memory. If it does not, it will be forgotten. So, what would it be with something's forgotten? This could be not processing something visually that's important to us. Or maybe there's a smell in the room. It's a pretty, like my office. I'm sure it has a smell, but I don't smell it, so I'm not consciously processing it. That's going to be forgotten. If you ask me what my office smells like when I get home, I don't know, right? Well, whatever draws our attention, if I all of a sudden smelled a skunk smell in my office, well, that would surely draw my attention. I'd be looking for a skunk or something, right? That's going to be in my working memory. Working memory is also your short-term memory. This is what you are processing right now. So with you watching me in this video, all this information about memory is in your short-term memory. Typically, this capacity is 7 to 9 chunks of information without rehearsal. And it'll last about 5 to 15 seconds. What is rehearsal? Well, that's like an actor rehearsing their lines. What do? They say them over and over and over again in the hopes that they will remember them. Well, that's how our working memory works. Have you ever gotten someone's phone number but you didn't have a way to record it? We put the numbers in little chunks to help us remember better. Area code, first 3 numbers, last 4 digits, right? That's maintenance and elaboration. We're elaborating on the material, rehearsing it over and over so we can remember it. That's our working memory. Now, with successful rehearsal, we are hoping that those memories will be encoded into our long-term memory. They're going to be consolidated, and we're going to put them into the little file cabinet that is our brain for later retrieval. Now, excuse my email beep. Sorry, I forget to turn that off. Now, with proper encoding, it should be stored in our long-term memory. Now, with our long-term memory, the capacity is infinite. There's really no limit to what we can store, and it's typically permanent. The trick comes in trying to retrieve the information later, because sometimes we're like, well, I learned about classical conditioning, but I can't remember anything. That's a problem in the retrieval process, and we're going to talk about that. But when we retrieve that information out of our long-term memory, it is going back into our working memory because that's what we're processing right now. So if I asked you who the first president was of the United States, you would hopefully tell me George Washington. That information was stored in your long-term memory until I asked you and brought it back into your conscious thought. Now it's in your working memory. George Washington, first president of the United States. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like storing it away, not really conscious of it at all times. I think if we were conscious of everything, it would be impossible to be conscious of everything we know at once. So we have to kind of shuffle which things we're going to focus on. That's the part of our working memory. So once that information is stored, it can go back into long-term memory. For example, you were looking at me shuffling my hands. You weren't thinking about George Washington then, but now you might be thinking about him now. So now we're back on George Washington. Do you see how that goes in coding? And we'll put it back in the file cabinet bring it out later. And we're going to talk about this some more because encoding is very important. That's how we transcribe all of the information that we're bringing in. So some things to note about encoding. It is selective and it is prolific. Prolific is very important because we're constantly encoding information. Our brain is constantly taking in information. It's encoding it. We're seeing how much attention does it really need. We talked about levels of consciousness. Well, some encoding is going to be more conscious than others, right? But it's happening all the time. We're constantly taking in all the stimuli. Encoding is going to be selective, though. We are going to attend to certain events in our environment and ignore others. So, if I ignore the normal, mundane, everyday smell of my office, I'm ignoring it. I mean, it's not encoded in my brain. I can't recall it later. But if there was a skunk smell in my office, my brain would attend to that smell. It's going to be selective. And I'm going to remember, hey, on February 18th, there was a skunk smell in my office. And it was really weird because I was trying to record a lecture and I couldn't get over the smell. Which there's not actually a smell in my office. I'm just using it as an example. But again, selective. What we're going to encode has to draw our attention. Now, for encoding events, distinctiveness is going to be important. So, if I asked you, hey, what did you do last Friday? What was your walk like to school? You may tell me, well, I did the usual, got up at 8, walked from building 9 to building 11, or whatever it is you do. But you may not remember what you ate. For lunch, you may not remember who you saw that day or everyone you saw that day. But distinctiveness, if something happened that stands out in the background, it may illuminate that day a little better. Now, if there was a police chase on campus on Friday, which there wasn't to my knowledge, that distinctiveness would help you remember the events that occurred in that day much better. You may be able to recall because seeing a police chase is so outside of the ordinary. Maybe they were driving around in the grass everywhere. I don't know. But that distinctiveness is going to help you remember everything else that kind of happened in your day. It provides something so salient and different that stands out so that your everyday experience on that Friday will be particularly meaningful. That's the word I'm trying to use. Now, distinctiveness is important, encoding is prolific, and encoding is also selective. So maybe that distinctiveness is going to channel our brain to say, hey, we're going to select our attention and focus on this wild, crazy police chase that's going on, right? Now, I'm going to throw you a little curveball. Recoding. Recoding is a part of encoding where we take the information in the form that it's delivered and convert it so we can make sense of it. Now, this is part of the encoding process. When I teach you some information, everything that I tell you may not make sense. Maybe you'll read the text to get another perspective, or maybe you'll supplement with your own examples. You're going to take in that information how you will best remember it. So you're going to remember the most important parts for you. An example of this is if I asked you the colors of the rainbow. If I asked you the colors of the rainbow, you might tell me, green, purple, blue, orange, and then you won't remember the rest of them. Well, sometimes we might recode that information to the acronym Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Pretty easy to remember once we recode that information, right? And sometimes adding information with associations or conditioning, like we talked about in the last chapter, can be helpful or harmful in building memories. I'll be honest, I don't remember what I was getting at with the DRM effect, so don't worry about that. If I can't remember it, then I'm not going to make you remember it. Maybe I need more memory cues. It'll probably come back to me later. But those associations and emotions can also tie into our memories. But does that always make them correct or more salient? It may make them easier to remember, but do we remember them as they occurred or as we thought they occurred? Questions?